Gwyn did not know how long he stood by the window. He was not aware of any sound until a search party began to arrive. The grapevine in Pendewi worked fast. Sometimes people even sensed the news before they heard it. 10 men sent off to look for Alan Lloyd, and later Mrs. Griffiths and another wife followed them. The search did not last long. Gwyn heard them return, the defeated stamping of boots in the snow, grave, deep voices, and the kettle whistling on and on and on. Hunger and curiosity drove him downstairs. The kitchen was so crowded he could not find a chair, nor reach the bread bin. He managed to sneak a plate of biscuits from the table and retreated with it to the door, where he leaned and listened, waiting for someone to mention the mountain and whatever it was that Arianrhod had built there. They were all talking at once, yet avoiding what they wanted to say. They were adults and didn't know how to discuss something that was impossible, something that they did not understand. There were pools of water on the kitchen floor, mingling with the crushed biscuits and cigarette ash. Yola was under the table snivelling, but everyone had become accustomed to the sound and was ignoring him. And Gwyn remembered the other search 4 years ago, when he'd sat under the table and cried because his sister was lost. And then the words that he wanted to hear began to creep out towards him. Did you feel it? Bloody peculiar. Like a net, a cloud. No, not that. Ice, a frozen cloud, more like a wall. Never heard of anything like it. Call the police. What can they do? Can't see a bloody thing out there. Searchlights? Gwyn sidled out of the door and carried his plate of biscuits upstairs. He heard the police arrive, and the girl began, being the last person to see Alan, was called down to speak to them. Everybody stopped talking when she came in. They drew back and gazed at the frail, white-faced child, so insubstantial and fairy-like in her white nightdress and borrowed grey shawl. They were all thinking about that other time in the same farmhouse when they had come to search for a girl like this one, so very like this one, only the other had been dark and rosy-cheeked, and they never found her. They bent their heads, straining to hear the words the girl spoke so softly. And when she had done, they all began to sigh and murmur about mists and mountains, and P.C. Perkins had to rub out half his notes. He was new to the area, just up from the city, and he felt a stranger amongst these superstitious and excitable farmers. There was a melodious voice conveying nothing but confusion to him. He went out all the same with his partner, P.C. Price, and they walked up the track for a bit to find out what they could. They returned before long and drove away without a word. It'll be in the papers, thought Gwyn. They'll call it a phenomenon, and then they'll forget about it. The searchers departed in ones and twos. We'll be back in the morning, they called. We'll find him. The Lloyds were last to leave. Yola had fallen to sleep in his father's arms, but now Mrs. Lloyd was crying. It was such a long, long night. Gwyn couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the windows. Iris came up and kept him company. They did not speak, but her presence was comforting. Just as she was about to go, and a sound came from the mountain, a long, wailing sigh. Did you hear that? Gwyn whispered. Was it the wind? She asked. No, not the wind. That sound came again, louder this time. Such an anguished, melancholy howl. It crept down Gwyn's spine and made him shiver. It's like a wild animal, said Eilís. Trapped, he added, and the howling gradually died away. and Iris returned to her bed. But later that night it came again, louder and more terrible than ever, though it seemed to be only Gwyn who heard it. It got in his head and he had to rock back and forth to endure the sound. He knew who it was, of course, and agonized over what it might do to Alan if it found him. And then he began to be aware that the sound was in the room. It was in the silver pipe lying on the bedside table. Gwyn jumped out of the bed, seized the pipe, and ran with it across the room, thrusting it into the drawer and slamming the drawer tight after it. But his horror, the voice within the drawer seemed merely to intensify. It got louder and louder until the whole chest vibrated with the sound.